delighted to be joined by Niklas Zennström, who famously founded Stripe, a small company you may have heard of, which I believe he sold twice, lastly to Microsoft. And since then, he is the CEO and founding partner of European venture capital firm Atomico, and has spent the last, I guess, probably decade helping to champion and invest and build out the European tech startup ecosystem. Niklas, thanks for joining CogX.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Now, we don't have a lot of time. We've got like 30 minutes, and there's so much I want to get through. So I'm going to start off with something you said a few years ago, which is a theme that I want to revisit, which is that you said that politicians are no longer the change makers, and instead it's entrepreneurs who are the most effective way of bringing about change, right? And given that I gather this is the leadership stage, and there's probably some leaders or politicians, but I think there's quite a famous one, former Prime Minister on tomorrow, I believe. I wanted to know what you meant by that, and whether you still believe it is true today as when you said it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I don't think we should give up on politicians. I think we all need to help them to do their job and to nudge them. And I would say, if anything, today maybe it's the civil society which are the change makers, if you're judging what's happening around the world. What I meant by that back then was that entrepreneurs, I think, have an opportunity and I think also an obligation to build the future that we want to see. And if you think back, some of the most successful founders, and this is not only in tech, this goes back to, the entrepreneurs 100 years ago as well. Successful entrepreneurs were always building something that brought society forward, whether that was railways or, the car, or, in the technology generation, whether that was someone like Bill Gates who wanted to put a computer on every desktop, or if it was Larry and Sergey who wanted to organize the world's information. Certainly when we started Skype, we wanted to free people from having to pay for making phone calls to be able to communicate. And what we have today, we have the most powerful toolkit in the world in terms of technology. And the next 10 years is going to be exponentially more powerful. And now we have the technology infrastructure. We have everyone, not everyone, but so many people around the world are connected to the internet with powerful devices and a cloud. And this technology now enables entrepreneurs to change not the technology itself, although some will continue to do that, but to change the rest of the world and to build companies that are actually beneficial to society and the planet. And in the old world, we used to think about that progress and purpose were something that would build a great company and have financial success. There was a cost to society. Now, what's happening today with a lot of companies is that you can actually build companies which are using technology that are benefiting, all different types of stakeholders. So purpose and profit are no longer exclusive. They are now mutually reinforcing. And I think that's the big opportunity for entrepreneurs to step up and build companies that not only be long-term sustainable in a financial way, but also can help to build a sustainable society.
So, I guess that brings us directly to your venture capital firm, Atomico, which most recently raised a fund of $820 million, and I think has something like $2.7 billion under management. And you described the firm as wanting to invest in mission-driven entrepreneurs, right? And I think one of your big theses is like that venture capital and entrepreneurship, and the so-called fourth industrial revolution, so things like AI, quantum computing, can help fix some of the problems that have been created, I guess, by the first couple of industrial revolutions, and also things like education and healthcare with the scaling population. These are huge problems. So explain a bit more your thinking there. How does
Yeah.
venture play in that role?
So I mean, we play a very small part. The big part is played by entrepreneurs and founders. What we can do is that we can encourage founders to build companies in one direction, and how they build, we can help them to coach them and to nudge them a little bit in how they're building companies. And of course, we can also select which companies that we want to back, that we think can be not only be financially long-term successful as an investment, but also have a purpose. Now, but what we can do also is that many founders that we back are, they might be the first time they're building a company, first time they're scaling a company. So we can use our experience and to help them to avoid maybe pitfalls, but also help them build companies that, we talked about here, the purpose and focus on what is the purpose, what are the things that you really want to try to achieve, and help founders to think, and to look at that North Star and make sure that's what they're trying to build, and also have the long-term perspective. But this is not to kind of, this is something that we think ultimately leads to good long-term investments. Venture capital is a long-term investment horizon. Fund is 10 or even longer, 10, 12 years. It takes maybe 8 to 10 years to build a company that has some reasonable success. If you want to have a really much bigger success, you need to wait even longer. So we need to take the long-term view, but always look at companies which have the potential to also be a worldwide kind of leader in its field, and to encourage founders to think a little bit harder on that and have a higher ambition level.
So I want to push back a little there, because it strikes me that a lot of venture capital isn't really very long term, right? Like some of it is quite short term thinking. And on the other hand, not to give you too much credit, but Atomico clearly does place some, in terms of in the whole portfolio, there are at least 3 or 4 companies I can think of that are kind of moonshot investments, right? I mean, you've got you've got flying cars, you've got AI chips, you have, I think you recently did quite a big investment in a quantum computing company.
Yeah.
So tell me about these mission-driven kind of moonshot bets that, frankly, may never even work out, right?
No. So I think it's those are kind of the type of companies investment that you mentioned, which are kind of exciting, and I'm certainly super excited about them. But I'm also very excited about a lot of other companies which seem to be a bit more like mainstream. But the benefit of being a fund is that we can take that risk, because as a fund you might have 25 to 35 companies in a portfolio, and the best performing venture firms maybe lose money on something that over 40% of your investment. So it's not about playing safe; it's about playing for the big opportunities. But I just want to stress that there's not all of these companies in our investments which are that type of company. We have companies which are doing, most of our companies are software companies, and there's a sliding scale of the kind of impact that it can have. There's a lot of companies which are just creating much more efficient enterprises and helping enterprises with automation and efficiency in their core processes. Might not be as groundbreaking, but those are also really, really important to create more efficient companies that can help to drive economical growth.
But when you do some of these, I know what you're saying, these are only a small percentage of the overall portfolio. But when you do these headline grabbing kind of moonshots, how do you? Because they really are. The theme is the next 10 years, right? And they really are the next 10 years. So how do you make those kind of investment decisions? And those big bets that, like I said, some of them may not even work out, right, at all.
Yeah. So they're big bets, but again, if you think about the opportunity of what some of those companies are doing, so if you take a company like Lilium, which is designing this electrical vertical takeoff airplanes. Some people like to refer to them as flying cars, but they're airplanes. And we made our first investment in 2016. Now, it's several years until they will be in the market. So in a way, it's like time is always a risk. But if they are able to pull this off, it's a big opportunity. And you need to use like break everything down in what are the different types of risk. One is the technology risk. Is this technology, is it in theory possible for this technology to work? That is not very different from if you're building a new kind of electrical airplane versus if you're building some kind of software. Of course, you need to analyze it, and you're looking at physics and so forth. Then you have things like, is this founding team able to scale? Are they able to recruit talent? Are they a talent magnet? And more specific for these kind of moonshot investments, it's actually financial risk. Are they able to attract financing along the way? Because if you, as we talk about these more mainstream venture investments like enterprise SaaS companies, which is very, very easy to analyze in terms of the metrics. You look at CAC, LTV, you look at net retention, and so forth. It's easier for those kind of companies to attract financing because you can see there's a growth in revenue. But these pre-launch companies, the big challenge there is financing. As an investor, that's something we look at into, so we don't get too much exposure into those companies. So we spend a lot of time trying to find other like-minded investors who are joining on those companies. But I would say that's something that we need more big investors who can come in and back those kind of companies. After kind of early stage venture capital investors, that because they need to raise lots of financing before they go live.
Yeah, no, totally. Switching the subject slightly, you've been steadfastly patriotic, if you like, to Europe. I remember when you did Stripe, there was pressure on you to move to Silicon Valley, and you declined. And you said, "No, I'm going to build a really big, meaningful company in Europe." And obviously, Atomico primarily invests in Europe. Yeah. And I just wonder whether that, is that based on the idea of technology sovereignty, which we're seeing quite recently. I think France the other day announced some investment from the government into startups during the coronavirus crisis. Or is it just about ensuring that Europe has the economical growth? In other words, what I'm trying to say is, how important is it that regions or countries own some of this core technology that's going to drive the next 10 years?
Yeah, no, I think the way I look at this is that, first of all, we all need to think about who we are, where we're coming from, and where we live, and what we care about. Me being Swedish, having lived in a number of different countries in Europe and the US, I see myself as a European, citizen and a member of someone living in Europe. And I care about this region. I love it. And I think we have a lot of opportunities. I do think that a lot of the economic growth is coming from technology innovation. So it's important for any region to have a strategy and to have an ecosystem that is able to produce companies that can drive economic growth and also, as we talked about earlier, a better society. I think that's critical just for growth. If you look at economic growth, employment growth, and so forth. Now, for me, more on a personal level, having grown up in Sweden and then living in a few different countries in Europe, that's where I started my career. When I went to start my own companies together with a co-founder in early 2000, we were living here, and this is where we act. You work somewhere, you get to know people, you hire someone, you do something together. So it's just an organic kind of growth situation. But then when we started to raise money from venture capitalists in 2000, which was pretty poor timing because of the whole .com crash started to happen, European VCs didn't really, hardly did exist, and they were very risk averse. Silicon Valley VCs were much more, had a bigger risk appetite, and certainly when for the first two companies, we couldn't raise anything from any VC, but with Skype, the same story. A few Silicon Valley VCs were keen to invest, and they say, yeah, you need to come over here. And we said, no, we don't want to, because we have an amazing team based in Europe, and I don't want to, we couldn't move everyone, and we didn't want to move. So that from a practical point of view, That's something that we wanted to stay. However, after that, what I realized was that what do you need to build, this technology ecosystem? You need, of course, talent, and talent is something that is distributed kind of evenly across the world. It's not like one region and one city that just happen to have all the talent in the world. Talent exists everywhere, just like whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an artist, a writer, musician, a chef, a dancer, a poet, whoever, different type of talent, they're just everywhere. So what we need to do, and this is something that we all need to do everywhere around the world, which is happening, by the way, which is so exciting, we need to encourage and help to build those hubs, those ecosystems. And you build those ecosystems by role models, by someone who has the fortunate to have some kind of breakout and becoming an outlier. And that's maybe something that we were really an outlier with Skype, and we had an opportunity then to help other founders, entrepreneurs, more people to become entrepreneurs, but also help them to think bigger and bolder. So I thought there was an opportunity that we had that was unique to the background of Skype, to become an investor to support founders in here in Europe.
But as well as supporting the ecosystems for that economical growth and to ensure that the talent, gets realized, in terms of sort of politically, how important do you think it is that countries own some of these core technologies? If we think about just something like AI, there's a so-called AI arms race, right?
Yeah.
And arguably whoever wins that is going to wield a lot of, macro power, right? Is that something countries should be thinking about?
I don't think any country owns a lot of AI except maybe, well, I cannot really think of any countries, but the different ties in different countries. But whether you're like a company in Silicon Valley or in Berlin or in Stockholm, the company is the technology in the company is owned by a set of shareholders who are pretty global. So companies are, startup companies are global per definition. There's no country that owns the technology. So maybe if you're domiciled in a country, that country has more impact on it. But I would say that it's important to build up these competences in countries, but it's very hard to say this kind of sovereignty of technology. And I think on the infrastructure, on the network level, you're starting to see some moves there, of course. But I think it's just in order for prosperity, it's important to be on the cutting edge of technology, not kind of to rely on other regions. But I think when it comes to startups and in kind of government, there's not a lot of collaboration. I think that's something that happens when companies become much bigger.
That actually leads me really nicely to my next question, which is that if we buy into the idea that entrepreneurs at least are one of the change makers, even if, as you said, societal and kind of grassroots pressure is something we've seen a lot more recently, then that sort of raises issues over oversight, right, and accountability.
Yeah.
And one could argue at the most extreme that politicians have been reduced to kind of latent regulators, right? Technology comes out, it changes the way we consume, it changes the way we operate as a society, and then the politicians have to play catch up. I mean, that's not a new idea. So I just wondered whether you have any thoughts about the way that chicken and egg situation, can be sort of the gap can be closed, and politicians who, let's face it, are democratically elected, entrepreneurs don't face the ballot box, right? So how do we deal with accountability and oversight in this new world?
Yeah. So first of all, I think accountability and oversight is hugely important because now technology has so much impact, and when it goes wrong, it can go wrong on a massive scale, and so it is more important than ever. And looking forward, it's going to be even more important that there is accountability and that there's oversight. I think that can be done in different ways, and certainly governments and regulators are playing a role here, and I think they will play a much bigger role going forward also that there will be more regulation happening because it is important. I do think that there's other types of oversights as well, and when talk about accountability, a part of that is also the civil society. So citizens, whether you are, the most important thing for a tech company is for them to be successful. It's not capital, it's talent. And more tech workers around the world, certainly in Europe, care about where they work. They care about if the company working for is doing something that is ethical or not ethical. And there are many people who are considering that and are then leaving companies which they consider doing unethical things. So, and I think that's something we just see the beginning of. And so for companies to be able to continue to attract great talent, they need to think about, are they doing things that are fundamentally ethical with their technology and their practices. I think there's also consumers who are starting to care about this more and more, but it's maybe still early on. It's like consumers are more and more wanting to get products and services from companies which are ethical in their supply chain, in the way they produce their services. And investors are playing a role as well, where if you follow the money all the way back to the big institutions, whether that is big pension funds and other big institutions, they are also now starting to put looking at investing in companies which are doing things in an ethical way. So it's not only kind of governments and regulators who we cannot just kind of say, well, this is the job of the government and regulators. I think all of us, whoever can influence in every way, has a role to play to provide that accountability and supervision.
No, that makes sense. We've only got like about 7 or 8 minutes left, so I want to bring us to another topic, which is if we sort of link it back to this change makers idea. I mean, one could argue, especially in the last few months, that the real change maker is events, right? With the coronavirus pandemic and the way that we've seen that already sort of accelerate digitization, and it's hard to imagine how society would have coped without the digital infrastructure that's been built up over the last, I guess, 3 decades, right? But on the other hand, the crisis has also revealed deep shortcomings in our preparedness, and including things like supply chain issues with PPE, questions over, over modeling and data sharing, with sort of the tracing aspect of it, and also the way social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and even YouTube have been quite vulnerable to the spread of misinformation. So I guess it's a big question, but how would you score our preparedness and the role that tech has fared, how tech has fared in its response?
Yeah, I think like the infrastructure, as you said, it's been quite surprising how robust the infrastructure is, both like the domestic internet connectivity that we all started to kind of use a lot, and all the kind of services that we've all been using. It's been extremely reliable. So that's, I think that it proves that the infrastructure is there. I think that some of the social media platforms, it's just that because they're being used more and more, and when there are more kind of information and maybe opinions being shared, the powers and the benefits and the weaknesses are proven, and we know already that some of these platforms had huge weaknesses when it comes to spreading kind of false information, and that actually has been, we've seen more of that now. So that maybe not so much of a surprise at all. I think that so far, I know there was a lot of initiative among a lot of people in tech. How can tech be part of solving the crisis? But it hasn't really been so much that we as tech can have done, other than providing the means for whether it's scientists or others to kind of work together in collaborative way remotely to work on solutions. We haven't seen, like, the AI haven't solved this crisis yet, and so it's hard to say. I think that this is not a tech problem. This is a pandemic crisis. It's a health and then an economical crisis. So I think we as a tech world, we need to also understand this is like, our job here is to play the support role and make sure that the system is working. So like the people who actually can solve this can do their job as seamless as possible, which I think they can do.
And just very briefly, we've only got a few minutes left. The question that everybody in tech has been asking is, what does the new normal look like, right? Or are things going to fundamentally go back to how they were? So, what's your view on that?
I think I know as little as anyone else. I think I've had many conversations over the last 3 months with other, people who are entrepreneurs, investors, board members, and I think what many of us were surprised with, how for modern companies, how seamless it was to start working remotely. I mean, most of our portfolio companies ourselves, we just moved from one day to another to work from home. And the other kind of big surprise was that how efficient it was to work remotely, having video calls. You click out from one meeting, click into another. And then people started to say, well, I don't know if you're going to go back to an office. But that was like maybe a month in, a month and a half in. And I'm pretty certain, though, that while working remotely and having video calls is a great way for efficiency, that was like I became successful as an entrepreneur on that thesis that video calls and voice calls would supplement the way that people would collaborate. But there's tremendous value in in-person meetings, and I don't think the in-person meeting is going to go away, and I certainly hope they will not go away. Personally, I get a lot of inspiration and energy meeting other people that I can learn from, that I can collaborate with. So, but I do think that we're going to be more thoughtful about it. I think that we will be more thoughtful about international travel. It's like, do I really need to get on an airplane for this meeting? Can I do maybe fewer meetings in person that I have to travel to, and do some of them over video? But when I do meet, I do it much more with higher quality and for relationship building and for kind of real kind of innovation and brainstorming, if you like. I also think that when we go to an office, we're going to go to an office because we want to collaborate, not just to sit in front of a desk and do emails. So I think you're going to see a more mixed up environment where there's a combination of, you go to your office and you do have meetings for interaction, but not just to kind of sit and work. I think that also what we haven't seen so much, we've seen a little of it, but there is a real problem with this home working, because some people might have a great setup, they might have a home office, but some people don't have that luxury. They might be living in a small place, and people are living by themselves. You get isolation, so you get a very, very big problem with mental health as a consequence. So meeting people and getting out of your home is a great way to stay healthy and to stay sane. Get your walks in and you get your steps and meet people and interact. So I really, really hope that we are not going to take this opportunity to go and live in some kind of a cyberspace world.
I don't think
we need to.
Awesome. No, I think I, for one, welcome a blended approach. Anyway, listen, Niklas, we're out of time. That was fascinating stuff, and I know we're going to go to a Q&A after this. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Niklas, that was a great session, and I just wanted to say we've already got 5 questions in for the breakout Q&A, which we're going to go to shortly. For anybody who's on the Grip app, you can go to what's happening now, and you'll see how do we get the next 10 years right, the role of tech and the VC. And if you click on that, that session will start shortly with Steve and Niklas, and we're going to go through your questions. So thank you guys for an amazing session. And we're going to take a pause now, and we'll be back very soon.